Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Mulberry talent conversation. I'm just going to give everybody a few moments to log on. Okay, it looks like we're rolling in. So again, welcome to a Mulberry Talent Partners Leadership Conversation. My name is Kelsey, and I am the Talent Acquisition Specialist here at Mulberry. So a little bit about Mulberry. We are a full service staffing and recruiting agency headquartered in Portland, Oregon, with an office in the Silicon Valley. We specialize in the professional placements of human resources, professional and financial office, payroll and operations positions with direct hire, temp to hire, and temporary opportunities. I would encourage you to check out our website at mulberrytalent.com to see our full suite of service offerings and check out our previous and upcoming leadership conversations. So jumping into introductions, we're joined by Lauren Francis and Jeff Eyman. Lauren is our fabulous founder and president. She started Mulberry back in June of 2017 and comes with over 25 years of talent acquisition experience. We're also joined by Jeff. Jeff is a veteran of 30 plus years in human resources leadership roles in the high tech and transportation industries. Jeff started a consulting business, JLE People Solutions, LLC, in 2021, focused on partnering with organizations, leaders, and HR professionals on talent, attraction, development, and retention of talent in this new world shaped by the global pandemic. We'd like today to be super interactive, so do not shy away from using the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll try to get to any and all questions that come in. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it off to Lauren and Jeff.
Welcome, everyone. And Jeff, thanks for joining us for our third session today. And for those of you that haven't joined us in the past, Jeff and I met probably about 10 years ago on a phone call. And I was like, I have to stay in touch with this guy. And here we are, 10 years later. And Jeff has just so much information, so much to share. And he's engaging and helpful and has just been such a great resource to Mulberry and to so many people that know him. And he just shared with us that he's just recently Hogan certified. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, Jeff, and how that impacts your practice.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so if you're not familiar with the Hogan assessment, it's a good thing to look up. When you look at different offerings of assessments, whether it's Myers-Briggs, DISC, others, Hogan kind of sets itself apart in terms of the depth and in terms of the validity of the data and the predictability of future performance. And I was very impressed going through the certification on how rigorous it was. Also stressed because we learned after about the first half day that there was actually a test at the end. And you know how your attention turns up when you know there's a test. But it was wonderful, wonderful people, and just an absolutely excellent process for interpreting the results by the certified Hogan assessment person and you, and really works well for both selection, especially at the higher levels, as well as management development. So real happy to be certified now and beginning to use it in my practice.
That's great. That's great. I'm so glad to hear that. Well, tell us, what are we talking about today? What's one?
Yes. Yeah, so before we get started, I really want to thank Lauren and Mulberry for doing these sessions. These are very casual, much like lunchtime conversations we used to have at work, where somebody had a topic, people bring their lunch bag with them, whatever, and you just have conversations about things. And I think in a lot of places things have gotten somewhat formal in terms of attending. So I just really appreciate the ones that you've done in the past, Lauren, and I know the ones that you'll do in the future will be spot on for people. I also like the fact that, if you can attend, these are available either on Mulberry's website, or you can actually search and follow Mulberry on YouTube, and you can look at all the past ones, and they're great, really good information. So this is a third part on series we talked about. It was just too much information to go through one on the war on talent. And again, back in the late 90s, McKinsey a whole different reason why there was a war on talent. And obviously pandemic, hard to believe we're, March of 2022 and March of 2020 was when, this all began, and people started moving to working remotely in a lot of cases where they could. And if you think about it, the interview process itself was modified. And it was modified quite quickly because you couldn't do in-person interviews in a lot of cases. And so I think it was really modified, and, using like Zoom, and how, the interviews happened were very much like in the past. But as the pandemic wore on and more people were using Zoom and everything else for video, interviews, in at least the ones I've experienced in other companies, as well as what I'm hearing, is candidates are feeling as if they're in a meeting. They're not necessarily in an interview. And the second thing is, it's very, very hard to assess culture through a Zoom video meeting. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that, if you haven't done it already, it's good to take a pause, especially with the mask mandates in the most part being lifted, an opportunity actually for more in-person interviews and the value that provides candidates. So we're talking about, improving the interview process. And I know, Lauren, that's the business that you guys do in terms of selecting. I'm sure you have a lot to add to it, but that's what we're going to be talking about today.
So what do organizations need to do to redesign their interview process?
Well, first and foremost, anytime you start something, you have to identify the problem, and you got to identify what the goal is, or goals. And I think in a lot of cases, we get very tactical, and we don't get to a high enough level to really understand what is it that we're trying to do better. And this has been a common thread through these series, so I have to do it again. And that's retention. Generally, if it's a replacement position, it's because we had a retention issue. Okay. If it's an ad, meaning we're adding the job and it didn't exist before, okay. But if we can reduce retention, then we're reducing the need for hiring. And some of the retention numbers are pretty sobering in terms of, this concept of the Great Resignation and all of that. I haven't seen this anywhere, and this isn't where it was coined, but it's the easiest way for me to explain it. It was followed by the Great Regret. And that is that the workforce now, the biggest group that's in the workforce are millennials. And in a lot of cases with the pandemic, when the Great Resignation wasn't generally people just leaving, it was people moving to other places, okay? And surprisingly, a lot of those people that moved were very disappointed. And why could they have been disappointed? Through their perception in the interview process, through assumptions. But here's the key. In the quote old days, having at least 2 years at a company on your resume was important. That is no longer as important. So if a person has 6 months at a company and they can explain why they needed to leave, that is a lot more receptive in terms of the candidates having a little bit more power because of the need that there is in companies. So we got to kind of shatter, an interview process that really gets passed down, through, whoever was doing it before. How do you do it at this company? And you just go on and on. And here's the behavioral questions. You just kind of go through a process, but you don't have the goal. What is the overall goal? What is the problem we're trying to solve? And I would say that I would start with this, that the concept of improve the interview process. The interview process is sort of the middle of the full candidate experience. Okay, so we've got to make sure we understand that interview process is actually, and it's very important, but there's other things that can lead to not getting the right candidates to the interview process because of lack of responsiveness by the company, be it HR, hiring manager, whoever, that is really being scrutinized. So improve, the way I look at it is, it's to attract and make better hires. We always have to be looking at a process in terms of process improvement.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be unwielding, especially, talent acquisition has, and make up a number, they normally, would have 20 jobs open, and currently they have 100, and they have the same amount of resources. And so it becomes a volume. It becomes, we got to just get people in the seats. Well, if we're doing that, then we're creating a retention issue in the future, and you're going to be right back doing it again. So the real question is, what is your goal? What is it you're trying to convey? And lastly, I like this comment. You can lead a horse to water, but there has to be water to drink. Absolutely. And that's a great comment, because I always, in the interview process, like to tell who I'm interviewing what the current problems are and be transparent with it. And then ask the question, are those the kind of problems you would like to help solve? So those are important things, but also some of the things I've been reading lately, it's a little bit counterintuitive. In some interview processes, because of the fact it's harder to retain people, we've made it less difficult to go through for the candidate. Well, interesting enough, the candidates want the process to mirror what the work environment's like. And so if that work environment is difficult, challenging, and the interview process is easy, and by the way, go on Glassdoor, look up different companies, look up the comments that people make about interviews, and there's a rating on there, which is how hard was the interview. And very, very seldom on the ones I looked at, even at an Intel, it was average to easy in terms. And by the way, you can argue with that, but again, that's perception. And so the key thing is to start out with what are the goals? The last thing I'd say on this is the movement that companies made, which was all the right reasons, should have been doing it a long time ago, and people are doing a much better job understanding, and that's around DEI. And if you look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, the question is, how have you changed your interview process at all to help that effort? So if you're just going along and it needs to be a job filled, and here's the job description I've used for the last 5 years, and we modify it a little, put it online, but we're not showing how we are around DEI, we're really losing an opportunity on people that are looking for companies that want to lead in that area.
So what are some of the challenges that candidates are facing with the current interview process? One of the things I found is they're trying to move too quickly. So before it was, there would be delay, so-and-so's out of town, blah, blah, blah. And then 6 weeks later, it's like the whole thing falls apart, right? Or the candidate's experience is compromised because of the, just the way in which it unfolds. But then we're finding that people are making decisions so quickly, not even, and candidates, let's say, haven't even had a chance to see the environment, if it's an on-site or a hybrid role. So there's just a couple things that I'm seeing that are challenging for people.
Yeah, I think you've, if you haven't done it already, I think, I'm always amazed in an interview process, and I've been in many of them through the years, and this is more the norm. Let's say the interview is an hour, because hour is a magical time to select a person, right? And it gets to about the 55-minute mark, and the interviewer goes, "Oh my gosh, I've kind of run over. We only got like 5 minutes left. Do you have any questions?" Well, I mean, if you think about that candidate as a customer, you would do the process differently if you were trying to woo a customer to your products and services. And I mentioned when we talked about some of the objectives of this session, I I've always used Maslow's hierarchy as a baseline of how things are going and where the needs are. And with the pandemic, and if you don't know about Maslow's hierarchy, look it up, and it's really a great tool. We have really gone down to the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, which is safety security. So people are looking for different things, and if they don't get the opportunity to assess that and to do it in a fair, unbiased way, you're really losing the opportunity again on retention. They may select you, but may find that what they heard and perceived and assumed after 6 weeks, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever it is, choose to go, well, I had 2 other ones I was looking at, I'm going to contact them. Or companies are getting really good about welcoming back people that left, because they know that's a way of attracting, and they're adjusting things like things in their process around bridge of service and keeping people whole when they return. Kelsey, is there a question?
Yes. So question is, what is the opinion of having several hours long with panel groups filling the time with the candidate? Is this a good thing, or is it too overwhelming to the candidate to be blasted with so many people all in one day?
I'll go first. Lauren, appreciate what you're seeing. I think it's the proverbial answer of it depends. It depends on how well the panel has prepared. If they're preparing real time, the candidate / customer is going to pick up on that.
Sure.
And you have to evaluate that as a part of the culture. They were too busy for me. They didn't think it was that big a deal to select the correct person. So the preparation of the panel is really important. And then the second and last thing I'd say is it's the way the panel interacts. I'll give you extreme examples. I was involved in an interview process when I was being interviewed years and years ago, and it was a 1-hour interview. And there wasn't much information about what that 1-hour interview was going to be, but I walked into a panel of 8 people, and those 8 people all had one question. And then it went to the next person. And it was like trying to figure out what was going on from a candidate perspective and how they were even going to select was very difficult. And I would say after an hour with 8 people asking one question, it probably not yielding good data. Then if you're doing it on Zoom in this format and you have a panel, everybody's on it. Everybody's not in the same quote room. They all have their own screens. And so, the ability to interrupt, the ability to have somebody look as if, somebody walks into their office or whatever, and they're talking with them. It just is really, the process itself has to really be understood. I think it's less about the questions. It's more about the perception the candidate has of that process with a group, with a panel interviewer. Yeah. Lauren, what's your thoughts?
I agree. I also know that Nike did away with panel interviews several years ago. And it was for a whole different reason. It was just because they felt like that the individual didn't have, at least this is what I learned, maybe they're back to it, I don't know. But they learned that the candidate did not have really the right, they weren't in a great position to really express themselves and to be seen fully, because the interview process was intimidating. Now, sometimes being prepared is huge. I hear this all the time, that so many times the interviewee, the person that is interviewing is distracted, or looking away, or writing notes, or not really engaged. And that is a problem, because then they're not prepared. Many times they're not prepared, or you gather people in because they have to sign off on the candidate, yet they're really not interested in the outcome, if you will. Or bringing way too many people into the process. That's another problem that I see. So it doesn't really mean anything. So, and also to prepare the candidate for who they're going to meet and why it's important. And then on the other side, they're preparing the people that are interviewing, just like you had said before. So it isn't something where everybody just goes, okay, jump on a Zoom and we're going to, knock out this interview. The preparation is involved. And I see so many times they're not prepared, and the candidates feel it, and they disconnect.
Yeah, I think Brian, who's online right now, made a comment about the quote, it's been 2 years, right? And we're talking about things being old now.
Yeah.
The sequential process where you'd be in a room, somebody would come in and interview you, and then somebody would then come in and relieve them, and you'd see them interact, give you a better feel for how people work. You're getting a better feel for the culture. And I think the challenge for us is going to be in the interview process if we have hybrid roles or remote work, and we're going to interview them in the same way that they're going to be working, we're going to miss out. And the other thing I'd say on this is that back to the customer, can you imagine a sales pitch where we have an interview process where the salesperson is not prepared, is distracted, and has a customer across from them? The customer has other choices. We have to recognize that. We're not that special that, gosh, everybody has to work here because I work here and it was the right choice. They have choices, and you have to look at it that way. I also think we've gotten a little lax on preparation. And I'd also say to talent acquisition folks, as well as what you convey to hiring managers, be really careful of how much you express how busy you are. And sorry, I wasn't able to get to that. Hey, sorry, I wasn't. Think about that again from a customer perspective. Customers just want to know how you're going to solve my problem. And so no matter what's going on, you have to convey what the culture is and what you want to do to attract someone. So self-disclosure on things like that might seem like there's a level of importance or busyness, and you ought to be here because we're just really doing a lot of things, but really be careful of that. The other thing I'd say is there's two concepts that we have to understand and put in the forefront, and that's perceptions and assumptions. And just think about the hires you've been involved in, where either the hiring team made some assumptions about a person they hired, or the person hired says after the first couple of weeks, well, I assumed that what you meant was X. It comes back to that two-way communication in the interview process and giving the candidate time, and maybe even prompting them. Some good questions are things like, outside of behavioral interviewing and those kinds of things, is kind of what do you expect in a work environment? What do you expect out of a team, and what roles do you like? Because you can preface that by saying, hey, I want to make sure that there's a good fit for us and a good fit for you because we're having this conversation. So be very open to having them express what they're looking for. Somebody said, absolutely, perception is reality. It is the reality for the person. You can argue about it as much as you can, but minimize assumptions. Think about what assumptions you're making or will make, and what assumptions the candidate may make, and make sure that's handled in the interview process. I'd also say this too. I think we've sped up selection because of the volume and the amount of open seats that we have to fill. And you think about the whole process and you get down to selection. That's a very important part, obviously, of the process. And it's sometimes a couple of texts. Hey, I like this person. Hey, we ought to hire, blah, blah, blah. And someone goes, yep, let's go for it. And it's like, okay, the kind of old way of doing it was to get the interview team together and discuss it. And that's time, right? So again, making the best decisions and understanding what your goal is before you go about improving the process is extremely, extremely important. Kelsey?
Yes. So we have just a question is, what kind of other tools, or are there any tools that you've been using to help hiring managers be more professional in the interview process?
Yeah. So here's the overall concept. You want to reduce variation in the process, and variation will exist with people who have experience and have their favorite questions. and their favorite way of, I remember a person I used to work with, this person's interview process was, I'm going to make it as tough as possible, and to the point where the person's frustrated because I want to see how they work in that process. To another person who says, I want to make it as fun as possible. I'll have a few questions, but we're just going to have a conversation. So the collectiveness of that, someone has to own the whole process and ensure everyone is playing their role in the process in the way of solving the problem of attracting and then retaining the best talent possible out there. So I think reducing the variation is extremely important, and someone owning that and driving that. And I've seen the best ways of reducing variation is where a hiring manager might, just again, making up a number, might hire 1 or 2 people a year. Well, that's only 1 or 2 occurrences, yet talent acquisition might be doing 100 to 300 or something. So you have some experience in that process, and the hiring manager only has history of that. So having templates for evaluating, having templates about what role you play and what we want you to talk about, and having it in front of them, as opposed to just, hey, can you cover this, and then make assumptions that they're going to do it in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. By the way, back to the panel thing, when people are interviewing people individually, that's really good, and you get together. But the nice thing about panel is people self-correct themselves in variation in a panel, because someone will say, ask a question, and they'll say, hey, I don't know how the others of you feel about this, but what do you guys think about this? And others, why don't you jump in? So you have the benefit of having a more robust and probably better answer and better questions for the candidate. Wow, Kelsey's back again.
Yeah, we have pretty much 3 questions, it looks like. Okay.
Oh.
Number 1, how much weight should be put on the candidate to research the company versus disclosing in the attracting/interview?
Oh, my personal opinion is huge. Some people, that is their first question. And I think it's a great first question.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what you know about our company.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what you know about our organization. Tell me what you know about, the job, or, any challenges, we might be facing, because people need, on their side, they need to be doing research as well, and not just leaving it up to that. So make sure you're asking questions of the candidate about what they know, because I'm actually really shocked when you ask that question and the person says, well, I haven't really had time to look into you guys. And it's like, Lauren, what's your thoughts on that?
It's not going to work. It falls flat.
Yeah. And it's actually a first indicator of really how much the person is looking to in their own fit with the company.
Sure.
Okay. Because they get to the interview process and they've done that research, they're still in the process. If they've done that research and they say, no, I don't want to interview, then they've made a selective decision on their part.
Sure.
So Kelsey, you had another one?
Yes. So second part of that question is, should interview questions be the same from candidate to candidate for the same position, or should it be left to the interviewer to come up with their own questions?
Okay, so there's 2 parts to that. I think we all know from a legal perspective, we need to be asking the same questions of every one of the candidates. We can vary a little, but we've got to have that from a fairness standpoint, from a DEI standpoint, all of those things. From a question and a broadness of what we want to look at from candidates, the candidates that are, just think about yourself. You have 5 people interviewing you, and 1 question comes up or 2 from every interviewer, and you have to say it again to that person. That means they're not going to probably debrief. So you got to be very, and that's where behavioral interviewing is a good thing, because you're assigning questions for people in an area to explore. I'd also say in technical positions, the panel and the type of questions, the resume is one thing, but if you're really trying to assess technical, that's where a panel probably is a better way of assessing technical. And one more comment, think about also, and this has always been, I think, high variation, and that is the phone screen that leads to the interview if people are doing phone screens. And I'm always amazed at the times where people really didn't have a process, didn't really know what questions they were going to ask. And some of the best talent acquisition people I've seen do phone screens, there's a template, and they're able to give that hiring manager what they assessed on that template for every one of the candidates, and that hiring manager has a better opportunity to make the best decision of who's going to be interviewed.
Sure.
And Kelsey, you had a third one?
Yes. Okay. So third question from Brian. We're nonprofit. Leads from our community partners have dried up, and we're not getting sufficient volume of candidates for our open positions from the standard venues. What resources would you recommend for us starting to think outside the box about recruitment?
Oh, that's good. The first thing that comes to mind, and Brian, I think it's a great question, because you're not the only one that's running into that, is employee referrals are, statistically, it says that, when an employee refers someone, the likelihood they stay longer is higher. It's not necessarily the case if they're not evaluating the person to the actual job. They're just evaluating them on the level of that relationship. So if sort of time is money, and the longer we have that position open, we're going to lose the opportunity in a nonprofit to, serve the people in need or fundraising. Then offering a dollar amount for employee referrals for different kinds of positions to get employees involved is extremely, extremely important. I also think that we have to get a little more creative in how we're doing ongoing talent search in terms of the people that aren't looking for jobs, and having that list of people that we know ongoing to be able to refer to. But I think the employee referral is probably one of the better ways of increasing that. Maybe in the short term, but once it gets going, I think you're going to get a better candidate coming through as well. Lauren, what's your thought?
Well, the passive efforts for sure. I mean, would not, if we didn't have the passive tools to reach out to candidates, we would be it wouldn't work. A lot of, placements wouldn't happen, because we have to create those relationships and to, engage people that are otherwise not looking. Secondly, I think using your past database, people that have applied to positions in the past, and if you can, reach out to a group of people, letting them know about these positions, the positions that are open, that is another great resource, because they've applied to the positions in the past. So
yeah, I also think maybe in Brian's case with a nonprofit, this is a little different than for-profit. For-profit, you want to stay away from recruiting from your suppliers and your customers overtly. Yeah. But I think with nonprofit, also you have a base of people that are volunteering, people that you serve, those organizations, and making them aware of some of your hard to fill positions and what you're offering, so that at least they have the information. Getting people to have more information and having the opportunity just to come across someone on a weekend and say, well, I know that so-and-so is doing some hiring, that also is going to yield a better pool as well.
That's true. Yep.
So I think we're at the end of our half hour here.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask really quick about assessments. So you just finished the Hogan process and so on. And I know there's several companies that have they create an assessment before they meet the candidate. And then there's assessments that happen at the point in which they're very, very focused on that individual, and the assessment is at that stage. What is your recommendation on assessments and where they fit into the hiring process?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the hierarchy of an organization, the higher level positions, you probably want to have that assessment done when you have 2 to 3 qualified candidates that you want to interview, because that's going to modify how you're going to interview the person in terms of same questions, but variation about what you know about their tendencies, be it a tendency for continuous improvement or not. And so you're going to be able to do that better. I think if you're doing it after the interview process and you're trying to validate your selection, I don't know if that's going to yield much better data. So the question really is, if you do it before the interview process, who are you selecting and why are you doing it? And I've kind of vacillated over the years about assessments as part of sort of the pre-interview process, but I've really come to a different place in the sense of how are you using it? And what is the person getting out of it, the candidate as well? It can really provide valuable information. And in fact, I know of one situation, very high level position. They chose not to do an assessment. And this was a SVP of a company. And within about 30 days, the company knew they made a mistake. And so they had an assessment done of this individual. And when that individual got the results back, they looked at it and said, I made a mistake. Okay. So, but the problem was it took $3 million to rectify that situation when the assessment would have been, let's say $300, $400.
Right.
And so when there's, the higher level position, if you hire someone and then they're gone right away, that's extremely disruptive to an organization. But if you want to make a better hiring decision on certain positions, assessments do have a role to play.
You do. Yeah. Well, thanks for that.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jeff. I'm going to show you some upcoming conversations that we have. Let me share my screen. Okay, so we have Kia Myers-Dugan. She was a guest on our webinar before, and she's back for a leadership conversation. She's going to talk about how to lead courageously and boost profits, productivity, and retention. We also have some exciting career conversations coming up and are just getting some others on the schedule. So stay tuned. And then here are some ways to stay in touch with us. So feel free to connect with all of us on LinkedIn, email us. We'd love to hear from you. And we just want to thank you so much for choosing to fly with Mulberry. We know that you have so many options when it comes to webinars, and we're so happy that you joined us today. And a big thank you to Lauren and Jeff. Thank you so much.
Jeff, so much.
Yeah.
We're going to miss you. We're going to have to do this again. I'm sure there'll be a topic that we can push out for 3 sessions again.
Yeah, for others that were here today or watching it later, feel free on that information to contact me, link with me on LinkedIn. Just if you want a short conversation of what would you do, I love coaching people, so don't hesitate.
Yeah, you're so generous, and it's just a pleasure always to have you hear your perspective and listen to what you have to say. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, have a great week, everyone. Bye.
Bye.